Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening to wherever you are. It's a delight to be here. My name is Peter Upton, and I'm going to be leading this masterclass on the art of partnership and grant working with you today. So thank you to you for joining. We've got a webinar chat box on the side. Hopefully, what you can see on your screen at the moment is IFLA, the art of partnership. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to run through some of the basics of how to do grant applications, some of the do's and don'ts of partnerships, and we're also going to have a Q&A at the end. We're about 40 minutes in the presentation and then plenty of time for questions. But this is your opportunity to ask all those questions you've always wanted to ask about partnership, grant writing, but sometimes we're afraid to do so. So if you're all happy, we're going to kick off talking about the art of partnership. But first of all, a little bit about how this came about. Thanks to Sigil, who funded a series of pieces of work on partnership, how-to guides, and a range of resources. So thank you to them. This is all about how to help you write grant applications and partnerships. A little bit about me. I'm Peter Upton. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of K2P2. We're an international education community, and we work with a range of clients, including IFLA, Cambridge University, some hedge funds, and IDP and the British Council. And so currently we're working on about 15 projects at the moment. We work on issues from grant applications to designing bids, to actually helping implement partnerships in education, arts, civil society, and inclusion. That's who we are. Let's just talk about the art of partnership. So what we're going to cover this morning is some framing issues, how to scope the offer, how to develop a proposal flowchart, how to avoid writing a bad bid, and you'll be surprised by some of this, some of the timelines that really matter, and the 8 lessons of success, as we call them. So let's just start off with framing the conversation. But before we do this, sometimes when you look at webinars like this and people talk to you about doing grant applications, it can seem to be overwhelming. But as my favorite author said, Douglas Adams from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, don't panic. It's all doable. One of the things you should have in front of your screen now is some of the recent feedback I have seen on some applications. So these are 3 different pieces of feedback that was passed on to me from some clients. Feedback number 1's quite interesting. Now, feedback number 1 was for a project to do with education reform in Pakistan. The bid was put in for 500,000, and the feedback from the grant organization was an intriguing and innovative proposal. And basically what it meant is we didn't understand it, our advisors didn't understand it, and we just didn't believe it. And it was quite interesting because this came from quite a sophisticated group who put in the submission. Feedback number 2 was from the World Bank. This was for a £4 million proposal. And this is classic World Bank language. We appreciated the comprehensive delivery plan and its supporting architecture. We just had some concerns on the cost structure. And the translation on that is you weren't financially viable. You actually didn't do a bid that met our financial rules. And the third one was from a grant organization. They put in a bid around £2 million for working in the arts community. And the feedback from the grantee was, we're very concerned about the timescale, the delivery model, and how we could be engaged in the process. And what that basically meant is, have you read what we wanted from you? You were telling us what you were going to do, but you didn't seem to be listening to us. So the question is, how can you avoid this type of issue? So let's start off with the first question, which is why? The why of partnership. So the good things about partnership is it can provide you with scale and income generation, and that's got to be good. And it's also good about building credibility and confidence in what you do and in your portfolio. It's also good because it takes existing portfolio services that you've got and actually maximizes those and develops those. It can actually diversify your content. It gives you an opportunity to work with other people. And it provides you with something we call maximization. You've got your existing services, and this aims to amplify them. And of course, it's great for your brand. The final thing that you'll often hear is it's good as a multiplier effect. In other words, it has multiple benefits that scale up. So it's good for skills of staff. It's good in terms of grants. It's good in terms of profile. It has a multiplier effect. So these are all the good things about working with partnership. And the bad is it requires investment. It takes investment in money. It takes investment in time. It takes investment in market checking. You have to actually invest in what you're doing. And the other thing is, it's very competitive. It's not a complacent approach. It requires you to be very focused, really out and hungry to win. There's a lot of complacency around grant applications. People tend to think it's quite easy. You hear a lot about how successful bids are straightforward. It's not easy. Quite often, if you want to do something in a grant, you may need partners. You may need to be in a consortium. That can be very complex to manage. And the other thing is clients. Whether it's a donor, whether it's a grant organization, whether it's a foundation, they expect you to understand them. It's not their job to understand you. So it's really important to actually recognize that each of the clients are different, they're unique, and they all have different needs. And then finally, you've got this issue about delivery. If you promise to do something, can you deliver it? So there are good things and bad things about partnership, but just to say it's big. The amount of money that is available is big. Now, I'm just showing you what's available this year for education. There's $14.3 billion from governments, 1 billion from foundation. There are 5,000 education contracts being offered each year, and the average growth is 3 million per year. And that's just education. Now, if you add arts, civil societies, you add digital engagement, those figures double. So first of all, it's a huge market. So in the last year, there were 1,400 education, arts, civil society, and environmental expressions of interest. An expression of interest is where a community publishes and say, we're interested in getting applications in these areas. 1,400. So you can see 1,400 each year, every year, and there's no sign of that declining. 50% of those were from donor organizations such as the World Bank, the Foreign Office, the EU, the Asian Development Bank. 20% come from governments, but 30% come from foundations, grant agencies, or international non-government organizations. So there's a huge demand out there for people to submit grant applications for a range of education, arts, civil society, and environmental activities. And that involves libraries, it involves digital communications, and it involves the areas that you're concerned in. Most applications can be done in 20 sides. There's very, very structured approaches, so this should be straightforward. But if you're going to approach this, the question is, how do you do it? And, the reality is there's a very simple staged process. And the first stage in this process is to determine your priorities and to build a pipeline. What are the areas you're going to focus on? What sectors are important? So the first thing you do is you scope and prioritize. The second thing you do is you start to look at, once you've scoped down, who are the key players in the area? What's the important thing they want? And start to talk internally about, should we be applying for this grant? Is this something we can do? And you start to reach out also to the grant partner. The third thing you start to work on is starting to think about what is it you're going to offer. Most grant or foundations or even donors will say, here's a structure for a proposal. Fill it in. What will you offer in this proposal? So the third stage is about designing, thinking about What are you offering? What's the solution? What's the development? What are the people? And what are the costs? And we'll come back to costs in a moment. And the fourth thing is what we call the Wimbledon effect. Play to what you can do. Bid for things that you've got strength in or your partners have got strength in. Don't bid for things where you don't have skills, expertise, or knowledge, because all you're going to do is waste a lot of time. The other thing that's around in this is if you're going to decide to bid, make sure internally people know, make sure that people are aligned, make sure that you've got a process for deciding who, what, and where. So make sure you're clear about who owns the bid, who's accountable for it, who's going to submit it, who's going to write it. So streamline your decision. There's sometimes a temptation to think that actually if you just bid for small bits of money for 100,000, that's probably quite a good way to build up skills. The reality is, bidding for something as small as 100,000 or 50,000 can be as expensive and time consuming and complex as bidding for something as big as 5 to 10 million. Small can be very expensive in terms of time and scale. And within all of this, there is a sort of reality that actually working with regional roles, particularly in your network, in your distributed network, is really important. Using the skills from the region, using your regional committees, using headquarters, really important to building up a really good proposal. And then also what we'd also say is build networks, build partnerships for delivery and success. So there's a pipeline, a structure. Now, quite often, one of the things that you'll come across is that a lot of organizations will start to throw things out and say, well, we need a problem tree from you. We need a log frame. We need a theory of change. And these can all be very intimidating. So I'm just going to spend 5 minutes or so just providing you with a bit of insight about some of the project planning tools that can be very helpful to you. And I'll go back to Douglas Adams and say, don't panic. The first thing that often gets mentioned is something called a problem tree. And a problem tree is very easy. And I'll give you an illustration of one in a moment. But it basically says, here are the issues, here are the causes and the effects, and here are the problems, and here's how we can solve them. So it simply provides a visual representation of issues that infect the original problem. The second thing you often hear is someone talking about a log frame. This basically describes what you'll do and how you'll monitor progress in a project. The third one is the one that most people hate. It's called the theory of change. And actually, theories of change are your friend. It's basically a framing device that says, if we do this, this is what happens. And here are the processes in between. It's sometimes called a roadmap, but mainly a theory of change just documents how to actually achieve what you want to do. So problem tree decides the problem. Theory of change articulates the problem and the solution. A log frame simply provides the process map for how you deliver it. So don't be put off. Here are some very simple examples. Let me just show you this. Here's an example of a problem tree. This was to do with a literacy program for young people in Egypt who were suffering from a cumulative effect of a lack of access to literacy. So if you look at it, you can see underneath a series of boxes that say causes. Egypt's educational system unable to meet demand. System reform is hindered by lack of alliances. Poor educational infrastructure. Demographic expansion is a real problem. And the effects of these then are shown above. Interventions are not sustainable. There are no pathways for employment. There's a failure to meet targets. So here what you've got is a very simple cause and effect model, which describes the problems of Egyptian learning poverty. Now, this is a very standard template. It's used a lot, but this is very helpful just to articulate and frame the issue. So remember, the problem tree frames the issue. Now, I hope you love this diagram. This was a theory of change that was for the Punjab in Pakistan and was to show what you could do in terms of transforming educational capacity in the Punjab. The education system of the Punjab is bigger than the UK's education system. So here you see a Punjab theory of change, or roadmap in this instance, which has got four strands in the centre saying one of the activities is senior leadership development, second activity is change management, third activity is needs analysis, fourth activity, training capacity development, and the purpose is to system strength. So that's the core of the theory of change. The inputs are on the left-hand side. You can see it. We'll do leadership development. We'll do mapping. We'll accredit. We'll do master training. So those inputs link into the four strands of activity. And on the other side, it shows you what the impact is. It allows for 2,000 master trainers to be trained. It shows a change management process. It improves learning and techniques. So what this provides is a structure. Now, this is both a theory of change and a roadmap. There are lots of variations in this, but what it basically does is sets out problem, inputs, activity in the center, and impact. And actually, they're as simple as that. So let's just look at some issues around scoping. Because if you're going to do a grant application, if you're going to do a partnership, you need to start thinking about what you're going to do, and you need to start scoping out. And one of the things that we recommend you do is just this simple scoping. First of all, you scope out the market. Who is it you're going to work with? Who is the most likely grant partner? Who's the most likely foundation? So first of all, you do the scoping. You find out in the market who it is you want to work with. Now, this is not that difficult to do, but it does enable you then to produce a short list of the most likely partners, which means then you're focusing on prioritization. The second thing you need to do then is to say, okay, if we want to do this, are these people we can work with? Do they, align with our vision? Do we align with their vision? Have we talked to people internally in IFLA about this? And do we know what we want to offer? So this bit really is about making sure that you've covered the grounds, that you're clear that you and them can work together, because you do not want to work with someone whose values are not yours. Don't just chase the money. The third thing you do is you do what we call due diligence. Most partnerships will, most grantees will actually have a dedicated website. You'll be able to check out their track record. You'll be able to look at their reputation, and then you can decide if they're a good fit for you. You'll be checking out them. They will be checking out you. The next thing to check is that if you want to put a proposal in, and if you want them to work on issues to do with library capacity development, training of librarians, civil society work, the first thing is, have they got the resources to support you? It's no good, putting in an application for 500,000 if the partner or the grantee you're approaching only gives out grants of 20,000. So really, first thing to do is, again, check, do they have the resources? Then actually check how well they work with partners. So have they got scale? Are they a good fit for you? The fifth thing to do, of course, is check how frequently they ask for requests. Some grantees actually put out partner requests every 3 months. Some have a rolling program. Some do it once a year. Find out the frequency. Then you can build a timeline. Then you can decide how you want to approach them. And then the final bit in this is value added. Will they be helpful? So if you bid, which takes time and effort, will they provide feedback on the bid? Will they provide insight? Will they be working with you as a partner in the bid? Will they be working with his partner in delivery? So find out how they work. So this is your basic scoping criteria, which basically enables you to decide who you want to work with, how you want to work with, and the scale of what you can do. But there are some questions. There are some issues to think about when to bid and when not to bid. So with donors and foundations, first of all, do you have a strategy? Do you have a plan of who you want to work with? Does the plan fit with your plan? either as a country or as a region. So the first thing is, does it fit with your plan, with your strategy? The second thing is, what's the return on investment? Remember what we said about small bids. Small bids can look easy, but they can take a huge amount of time. So maybe it's worth investing and putting some time in preparing for a big bid rather than a small bid. And the third thing to remember is, and I know you know this, bids take time. And one of the things that is really important is quite often you find that people are doing bid writing in the margins of their day job. And that really never works. You need to be able to create time and opportunity for people to put bids in that are serious and well crafted. And what you really want, of course, if you're really successful, is to have some large scale bids, some medium scale. But what you really want to do is have a very pragmatic approach. And then finally, don't bid for everything. Don't do a scattergun approach. There are some clients who we work with who think that any time a bid comes out, it's roughly in the area, they should bid for it. And we advise them not to do that because basically it gets a reputation of bidding and not winning. But worse than this, it means you're being non-strategic. So just check that when you're bidding for a grant, when you're bidding with a partner, when you're applying for an invitation to a tender, does it fit with the strategy? What's the return on investment? It takes time, and think about prioritization. So let's get into some of the details about building a bid. So if you're going to build a bid, you're going to apply for a grant, you're going to apply to a foundation, you're going to actually respond to a request for a tender. There are four things. First of all, it's the offer. What is the service you are going to be offering? You need to be very clear about the offer, the outcomes, how it's going to be delivered, who's going to be doing it, and what's the impact. So first building block, what's your offer? Do you know what you're offering? Can you articulate what impact? And are you sure how it will be delivered? So clarifying that. The second building block, of course, is what's the cost base? Now, usually what happens is most people leave the cost bit till the end. And if you're not careful, you end up subsidizing the bid. So we'll come on to that in a moment, but you need to work out what's the cost bid. The third thing is it's always wise to undertake a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So you do an analysis of what you're proposing, what the partner is, so you can see what the risks are. What are the risks that if you win this, you can deliver it? What are the issues? What are the opportunities? And this is about thinking forward and about how you manage delivery. Because one of the things that sometimes happens is people put the bid in, they put the grant application in, then they're surprised, they win, and then they start to stumble. Because there's only one thing worse than losing a bid, and that's winning a bid and not delivering. And then the final bit is due diligence. You need to do a due diligence review. You need to do it for your own organization, for IFLA, for your own peace of mind, which basically says, have you checked out what the prospective partner wants from you? Do you know what the grant organization will expect? Do you know what their reporting will be? Do you know if there are any risks associated with the project? So you're really, really clear about what the expectations are. So offer, cost base, SWOT, and due diligence. Those are the four building blocks for all grant applications, for all ITTs. But can I nag you about pricing, please? You can see this inverted triangle, and you can see the dotted line which says cost recovery. So basically, when you're pricing a bid, when you're putting in for a grant application or when you're submitting a tender, you've got to have a clear idea about your costs. Now, I know you know all this, but actually, you're not providing just for a member of staff's time or a consultant's time, because on top of that, you've got what are their on costs? What are the pension contributions? What are their fees? What's the management fee? So you need to be very, very clear about what a bid actually costs you. If you're putting in the price of a bid that's at cost only. So, for example, you're saying our staff, we're charging them out at £250 per day, and that basically is the equivalent of 1 day of their time. Then you're subsidizing the contract, you're subsidizing the grantee because you're not covering the related costs around surplus, around risk, around management fees, around their pension contributions, about any travel rates. So there is a quite clear hierarchy about this, and it's worth spending some time thinking about how you cost. Now, a lot of donors have a list of day rates, and a lot of grantees and grant organization foundations would normally say, if you're going to do this and it costs 300 staff days, we have a range of pricing for that. Most donors and foundations, most grant agencies expect people who provide the service to make a surplus. And the normal surplus is between 8 to 12%. And they will pay for quality, but they will not pay for excessive price. So getting the pricing right really matters. In the last year, I supported, I think, 35 different submissions. Of those, we had to refuse 5 and turn them down because we had to say to our clients, actually, this is not a cost-effective bid. You'll be subsidizing this. And it was only when they investigated, they found out that they were going to subsidize the project. Don't subsidize the project. And of course, 70% of all bids are lost on pricing. So getting the pricing right really matters. It matters to grant agencies. It matters when you're putting in an application. So how do you write a good proposal? How do we make sure that what we're putting really hits the spot? Now, I'm sure you know all this, but just to remind you, the first thing is to answer the question. Most grant applications will say, we're interested in this area. What is it you can offer us? The question they're asking is, our criteria, what we're interested in. How will you respond to this? If it's a foundation, it's similar. If it's an invitation to tender, it's very specific. But it's astonishing how many grant bids do not even vaguely get near the question. And that's why things like the problem tree and the theory of change become really helpful, because what they do is they frame the problem, they frame the question, and they frame the solution. So answer the question, even if it's implied. The second thing is, don't make it difficult. One of the things that's quite interesting is, when you're in the middle of writing a grant application, it's really challenging. You've got a lot of things to consider. It takes time. But the idea is to think about who's reading it. Think about the foundation. Think about the grantee. Think about the people who are assessing a tender. Make it easier for them by signposting the narrative. Give them clear headings. Tell them several times what's happening, making sure that it all fits together. So signposting is essential. The third thing that's around in this is, of course, one of the things that foundations and grantees look for is, have you got a design solution? So if you're addressing a problem, and let's say you're dealing with digital literacy in parts of East Asia, so you will have identified who the target group is, you'll identify the approach, you'll be able to articulate how this will operate, how the outcomes will be, and give them graphics, help them with flowcharts, help them with diagrams. So come up with a design solution to the problem that takes them through this. And this goes back again to the client. Each client has a different expectation. So you can't do cut and paste approaches. They expect you to know them. They expect you to understand, if you're applying for a grant, if you're making a proposal to a foundation, that you've read about them, you know about them, you know their key interests, and you've got an approach that aligns with their interests. So don't forget, when you're answering the question, when you're signposting and doing the design solution, keep referring back to the client. And the other thing that's quite important in this is, quite often a foundation or a grantee will be doing other things. And one of the really smart things that you can do in a bid is reference the other activity. that's happening with that partner, with that client. Because for them, then it's like, this is an added value. This is really an interesting connection. So it's not only you providing this service, but you're connecting with others and it can have a real impact. So look to help the client, look to have greater alignment. Be smart about your bid. Most grant givers, most foundations have a very clear view about where their priorities. Sometimes what the issue is a scoring criteria. Now, if they do that, look at the scoring, okay, and actually check your bid against it. If they score, for example, say, we'll give 40% on good quality CVs, then that's where you know you need to put the weight on. If they're saying, it's 35% on pricing, you know there's a weighting there. So look at the criteria for foundations and grants, look at the scoring, look at where their priorities are, and make sure your bid aligns with that. There's a thing about language. If you go back to some of the very first slides and some of the feedback, some of the language that we've seen in bids is really problematic. So the thing about language is you use specific terminology only when you need to. If you want to write a really good grant application, it's simple, it's articulate, and it's focused. And it does not have conditional language. You quite often see a lot of grant applications and a lot of invitations to tender responses using conditional language like we may, we will consider, we could. That's of no help to the clients, and you should avoid it. You are either going to do this or you're not. There are some very limited occasions where conditional language might be helpful, but in the main, they want to know what you are proposing to do. Don't forget about delivery. Normally, when you're putting in a grant application, they want to know who are the people who are going to be doing the work. So having good CVs with the right skills, having a clear, group of people who can deliver this is really important. You cannot put in an application that says, and we will identify the team later. That won't fly. You need to have a range of people who are there. One of the things that most grants and foundations hate is something called bait and switch. Sometimes what people do is they say, here is our team for the grant application, and they've got 5 great members. And then as soon as they get to the delivery point, the team is very different. You have to identify the core bid team, keep them, and they're the ones who are going to help you deliver. If you're working with partners, make sure you're clear about the role of a partner, because quite often you're putting in a grant application or applying for a foundation, you'll be working with others. Make sure you're very clear about their role, your role, who owns the bid, who's accountable. And then be clear about what the outcomes are. What does success look about? One of the things that most grant and foundations want to know is, if we give you £2 million, what do we get at the end of it? What will success look about? And that's not really just about, here's a list of metrics. It's about saying what the transformational change will be. How will this help shape learning? How will it help shape skills? How will it help shape engagement and impact? So you've got to be very clear about what success looks like. And then finally, it's about quality assuring. Once you've read the bid, once you've developed it, check it, recheck it. Is it good? Does it make sense? And you need to have this review mechanisms so you don't build in mistakes. Now, most of that's very straightforward, and you know that. If you're doing a proposal, there's a very straightforward flowchart that swings along with this. Here's just a very simple one for you. This is a proposal flowchart for a very large scale contract, around about 2 to 3 million. And normally it would have these very clear stages. Don't forget, all of these slides, by the way, are available for you after this presentation. So you'd normally have an introduction, which sets out the short and answer of the task, key points on IFLA, mobilization. Because one of the things that most foundations or large-scale grantees want to know is, how quickly can you mobilize? You normally then have a context setting for one-to-one slides, summary of what you're planning to do, a summary of the key data and the key challenges. There's normally a bit then about the background of IFLA, the background of you as a region or the background of you as a country, about your network and expertise, how you work, the type of partners you're working with. All of this is taking people on a journey. And then you start to move in to the solutions. You outline the problem tree. Here's the problem we're trying to solve. So you frame that. Here's how we're planning to solve it through our theory of change and the design solution. You then move into saying, this is how we understand the challenge, and this is what we're planning to do and why. So this bit about rationale and methodology is really important because you're saying, we've identified this problem, and this is how we're going to solve it. And we've decided this way because. And it could be because we've got the partners. It could be because this reaches audiences better. But it's about having that. And then this is one of your key bits, your approach, what the design solution is, how you can do it, what the elements of that are, what are the key components, what you're going to deliver, how you'll deliver, and who's going to do it. So this is taking basically your foundation, your supplier on a journey. And then normally what they ask for is some evidence from you. They'll normally say, can you provide us with some evidence of a track record? And normally you'd provide 2 or 3 case studies of things you've done before. This can be from IFLA or it can be from your region. Normally a case study is about 500 words. It's short and pithy. You also then have to have normally a bit around compliance. There is a range of standard policies that they expect you to comply with. There is a how-to guide on this that will be available for you from next week. And then there are the commercials. This is where you set out, this is how we're pricing, this is what it's going to cost us, here's the financial breakdown, and here's how we're doing it. And then there's a conclusion summary, and finally, your team CVs. So that's a very standard approach that most suppliers would recognize. So let's take a breath in here for a moment, and let's just make sure we avoid writing a bad bid. So you've written your grant application, you've written the proposal, you've worked really hard at it. Is it any good? So just make sure you tick on this. Do you know what the official criteria are? Yes. Have you tested the proposal against the criteria? And you won't believe how many aren't. Use people from outside of the team to assure the bid, to check it. Think about how others will see the bid. Read the bid from the view of the client, the foundation, the grantee. Do a gap analysis. Pause. Go back to criteria and ask that question. Are we missing anything? Is there something else we can do? Have that compelling narrative. Be clear about your outcome. Take them on the journey. Lead them through so they will just want to give you the money. And just make it easy for the client. Make it easy for the grant organization. Don't make it hard for them to find things. So let's just summarize the 8 lessons we want to avoid. We've missed the first one out, so I'm sorry, that's dropped off the slide. So one of the things, the second thing to avoid is not all the deliverables are covered. So you've got to make sure you've covered all the deliverables. You've got to have a design solution and a proposal that's very straightforward. It's not complex. Avoid the conditional language. Be very clear in your narrative. Make sure you've understood and client needs are understood. Make sure that you've got a delivery team. Make sure it's really good. Make sure that it's not above their day rates, their budget, and just ensure that it meets the criteria. If you just look through those are all very sensible. But there's one final bit in all of this. It's what we call is that it? You've worked really hard, you've answered all those questions, but if it doesn't have a strong narrative, it doesn't help. Remember, writing a grant proposal, writing a grant application, writing for a foundation is about telling a story that is persuasive, urgent and necessary. And I know you know, but timelines matter. And this is what normally happens. Grant proposals normally have a very limited timescale. So, get a project plan, organize, don't wait. Make sure you build in things like quality assurance to keep to your timescales. If you let people know what their role is in terms of the bid or the grant application, then it's easy to manage their time. Because if you're not careful, what happens is everybody thinks deadlines are flexible. If you know and you let contributors know their role, you can nag them. Do the commercials in parallel. They always take longer than you think. And then don't be afraid to outsource. Use consultants for writing a bid or development. But make sure you get the value for money right. Make sure you get the narrative right. So the key way to manage those timelines is all about planning, thinking, assigning roles, and making sure things are done in parallel. So why do things go wrong? So they go wrong for these reasons. They go wrong for desperation. People don't respond to the timelines. They're late to bid. It's a rushed bid. And if it's rushed, it's going to be weak. They normally go wrong because the application doesn't answer a question, doesn't meet the grantee's needs, doesn't meet the foundation needs, and doesn't actually respond to what the client wants. It's surprisingly common. And also there's something called the promise, because basically what you're doing when you're making an application to a foundation or to a grant or even an invitation to a tender, you're making a promise. You're saying, if you give us this money, we promise that we will do this for you. And one of the problems often is the promise isn't convincing. The offer is not realistic and no one's persuaded. So whatever the promise is, it has to be ambitious, really effective, but it's got to be deliverable, because there's nothing worse than under-promising and there's nothing worse than over-promising. You've got to get the middle right. Promise what you can deliver. Then quite often, it falls down on the team. You've got a really good offer, a really good promise, but then they look at the CVs, they look at the people and they go, these people don't have the skills. I mean, how are they going to do this? Or you haven't got a team. So make sure you've got the right team. Obviously, pricing, we bang on about pricing because it really becomes a factor. We found that sometimes people ask for more funding than agreed. They don't ask for enough. So getting the pricing right and justifying that is really important. And then finally, collaboration. What a foundation, what a grantee wants from you, and what's, an ITT or a donor wants from you is collaboration. They want you to be someone they can work with. They want to be able to trust you. They want to be able to rely upon you. They want to think you are credible, and they want to think these are people who are serious about what we're doing. So you've got to be able to demonstrate that you can do the collaboration. So let's just summarize all of this, and then we're going to go to some Q&A. So basically, the 8 lessons are market, know the partner, the offer, the proposal, the narrative, quality assure, cost and value for money, right people, right skills. So market intelligence, track the market, do the in-depth analysis, prioritize. Know the grant partner, know the foundation, know the donor. So understand so you can align. Be clear about the offer. Make the promise. Sometimes they can ask you for a capability statement of what you offer. Don't worry about that. There's a how-to guide on this, but just be very clear about the offer and the proposal. When you've got a proposal, make sure it's aligned with their needs, your offer. Make sure it flies. Remember what we said about narrative. Make it clear, make it urgent, signpost, telling a compelling story, use case studies, use small, vignettes to bring to life. Make it so that they really want to give you the money. Check it, score it, review it, make sure you quality assure it, involve other people. Don't do this yourself. I've done it many times when you've got your head in a grant application, you cannot see the issues because you're too busy trying to get it done. Get other people to do it for you. Remember pricing, cost matters, value for money matters. This money, if it's from a grant or a foundation, this is really important money from them. If it's from a donor, it's taxpayers' money. They will want to make sure that it's cost effective and cost efficient. And then finally, get the right people, right time, right skills. Building that delivery team is essential. So we're going to just pause there. And if you've got any questions, we'd be delighted to respond to them. So we're now opening it up to questions, and you can do that in the chat box, or you can raise your hand. Right, so thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation, Arlene. Day rates. We do have some day rates. So just on this, what you'll find is that if it's a donor agency, like the World Bank or the FCDO or the EU, they will have day rates and they are publicly available. If you can't find them, then let us know. Yes. So the other thing that we can do is if there are particular areas where you're interested in, for example, what's the sort of level that a foundation might have, we can also help you with that. So, for example, we know the type of day rates that some foundations offer, some large ones, and we can normally give you indications. So if you've got some questions on that, contact Stephen, and we'll group those questions together and we'll follow that up. So I've got a question coming through from Despina, which is about scoring. Is it common practice that this information is publicly available too? So what will normally happen, Despina, is that if it's a donor agency like the World Bank, the EU, FCDO, when they're doing an invitation to tender, they will normally publish their criteria. And normally from what they'll say is out of 100%, we will give 30% to the design solution, 35% to the delivery team, 30% to pricing. So they will publish criteria. What you find from some large foundations now is they're also starting to say, here are the criteria for our approach. So large foundations will also make it public available. Now, the interesting one is to do with grants. Where you actually have organizations that issue grants, they have what are known as implied criteria. So basically, they have their criteria in their scoring, but they don't share it. And if you're smart, you can sort of normally work that out. And normally, there are 4 key criteria. One is pricing. How much are you charging? What's the ask? Normally, if you accept that's about 25%, that's fine. That's rough scaring. 25% will go on, what are you proposing to do? What I call the design solution and the outcomes. That's fine. 25% would normally go then on the delivery team. Who are the people who are going to do it? And then 25% would normally be allocated to what I would call processes, mobilization, how quickly you can do things, your track record. So even though some grant organizations don't publish criteria, you can work out what they are. And if you're smart, you should always think in those lines. Are they getting value for money? Have we costed it rightly? Does it make sense? But just to go back, big foundations, large-scale grants, and donors will publish their criteria. So what I'm going to say is, just to finish off, first of all, thank you very much for taking time to attend this. I hope this was useful to you. IFLA, funded by SIGIL, has produced some helpful guides for you. We've produced a partnership toolkit that will be available, I think, in the next 2 weeks. We've then produced 3 how-to guides with PowerPoint presentations. And these guides provide advice on how to bid, how to sustain a partnership, and how to do things around evaluation. And also, you'll have this slide deck. So you'll have a range of resources that are accessible for you. We'll be offering another presentation on how to bid for grant applications in the new year with slightly different information, and hopefully you'll join in for that. But that is all from me in The Hague, where I can look out the window and say it's great and stormy, but just to say thank you very much for attending, and I hope you've had an excellent presentation. Take care and have a wonderful day. Thank you.